Good morning from sunny Dublin and welcome to this morning's ROBUS webinar. My name is Pat Kelly. This morning I'll be speaking about the Eco-Design Directive from the European Union and how this is going to move us towards modular lights for a circular economy. 34 attendees at the moment. Good morning, everybody. We'll just pause for a couple of moments and we will start probably about 4 or 5 minutes past the hour, when everybody's had a chance, because we're expecting some over 90 people this morning. So good morning again to those joining us for this morning's ROBUS webinar. We'll start about 11:05. Good morning again. 3 more people joined us. This is the ROBUS webinar on Eco-Design Directive, which will start in a few moments. Okay, we'll start with the introductions. My name is Pat Kelly, and I will be speaking to you about the Eco-Design Directive in a few moments. Good morning, thank you for joining us this morning. We'll just give you a brief introduction to ROBUS and to some housekeeping matters relating to the webinar this morning, including how you ask questions over this platform. Then we'll start. Okay, so thank you for attending again. If you are on ROBUS Go, if you are registered for it, or if you wish to register over the next day or so, that this is our ROBUS loyalty app for electrical contractors. You will receive 200 points when you attend any of the ROBUS webinars in the series. If you wish to register, just go to www.robusgo.com. Be sure and collect your 200 points. My name is Pat Kelly. I'm the ROBUS Research Development and Innovation Director. I've been the company's technology pathfinder and roadmap pathfinder for the last 6 years, introducing such things as driver on board technology, aesthetic design, human-centric lighting, and smart lighting at ROBUS. Part of my job is to keep an eye to the future, and the Eco-Design Directive is certainly part of that. It's going to influence all our futures in the lighting industry. If you wish to ask questions during the webinar, you will see your launch tool on GoToWebinar on the top right, and you can see a small arrow pointing to the right in an orange box. If you click on that, the control panel will expand out. When you do that, you can see that there's a tab called Questions down a little bit of the way down that control panel. And if you click down on Questions, you can see Enter a Question for Staff in grey. Just type your question over that and submit it. I will see all those questions, and what I will do is I will call out individual questions. I will composite them in some cases. 3 or 4 people may ask me a particular question about efficacy, let us say, in this talk, and I'll try to give you a composite answer on those. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the talk. You may, of course, ask questions during the talk. So welcome to you all again. We have 40 attendees already, and I'm going to start. So the Eco-Design Directive. Now, Eco-Design is not new. That directive has been around, the top level document has been around since 2009. But on the 5th of December 2019, a long-awaited directive called the Eco-Design Directive, in fact, there are effectively 2 parts to it, was released by the European Union. It will come into effect on the 1st of September 2021. And it will do 2 things. One is that it will challenge us on efficacy, and it will radically change how we label our products and how we measure for efficacy and what we are allowed to sell on the market. As part of that, it will move us towards modular lighting. And this is all in support of the circular economy theme, which is the theme that runs right through European Commission and European Union thinking, and has done for the last number of years. So, some learning outcomes for today. What exactly is the Eco-Design Directive? We're going to show you where you can find the definitive reference documents and guides for this directive. So it's a legal document, and we always say go back to the original text. We'll take you through the articles of the Eco-Design Directive, some key definitions which are going to change, and the annexes in some detail. In my slides, you will see a lot of text. Don't worry about that. Draw your eyes towards where I have highlighted in bold or in yellow specific takeaways. My aim today is to take you through this directive, which is quite a complex document, and to show you where the important bits are buried. And then to explain the challenge on raising the efficacy bar, the fact that there's going to be a little bit of complicated maths, which will be, you'll have some nice maths homework to take away for this evening, on how you calculate efficacy, because there isn't going to be one number fitting all anymore. I'll explain to you what counts towards energy consumption and the kinds of things that may be excluded. And that will lead us then towards circular economy requirements. And at the end, I will mention very briefly, although it's part of a related directive that was issued on the same day, the new energy labelling scale. And we'll just give you a very brief flavour of what that looks like. So, as with any legal directive, go back to the original document, and this is where you find it, the EUR-Lex law site, which is the European Union's own site. That is gospel. Those first 2 links are the English language, and they also provide, in a range of other European languages, the actual original Eco-Design Directive, which is from 2009. So it encompasses every product in Europe. It's not just lighting. But what has happened is that in December last year, there was a sub-document under that regulation, which was purely concerned with the lighting industry and with a wider example of things which have lights in them, containing products, they're called. Things like fridges, for example, or what we call luminaires at the moment, which are now going to be called containing products. So that's the regulation we're concerned with, and that's going to come into effect on the 1st of September 2021. So the lighting season after next, not that far away. Where you find this document is on the 3rd link I've shown you there. That's the actual document, the top level document with the articles, which I'm going to go through in this talk. The annexes, which is the 2nd link, are extremely important, and Annex 2 is the one that's going to concern you most. Because Annex 2 tells you how you're going to calculate your efficacy from now on, and how you're going to calculate what is the limiting efficacy below which you will not be allowed to sell a light fitting. So these are European directives, and they're transposed into national law by individual member states of the European Union. I'm conscious of my friends in Britain. You need to contact your Board of Trade and the government to determine the extent to which Britain will implement these regulations in the aftermath of Brexit. So the Lighting Europe which is the peak body for the lighting industry in Europe, has issued guidelines on the implementation of this in respect of lighting products only, because it feels it is only qualified to speak about lighting products. These lighting guidelines do affect other things that have lights in them, so-called containing products. Fridges are an example. And they have produced two very useful guidebooks, which I would strongly recommend that you read. The first one is the subject of today's webinar, which is the SLR, the Single Lighting Regulation, which is the eco-design requirements essentially on efficacy and on functional performance as well of light sources and separate control gears. That's what I'm going to spend most of my time talking about today. There is a second document, related document, called the ELR document. That is the Energy Lighting Regulation. Now, the Energy Lighting Regulation is the one that specifies the labelling requirements for light sources and separate control gears. The definitions in the ELR are the same as in the SLR. So if you see a lot of repetition in the ELR when you get your hands on it, it's essentially the same definitions, but what it's doing is it's saying, okay, when you've done everything on your design according to the Single Lighting Regulation, when you go to put the product on the market, here's how you're going to label it. And you're going to label the light source. So it's going away from labeling the overall product to actually labeling the removable light source. Now, this is one of the critical slides today. The scope is changing. We are used to the concept of lamps and luminaires. That's all going. And forget about that now. We have a completely different world where we have what are called light sources, which may be a lamp, it may be an LED, it may be an OLED, and it could be an OLED module. But it's essentially the minimum part which you can produce from a piece of equipment, like the gear tray in a linear, for example, which you can remove and which has got all of the necessary drivers or whatever else so that you can verify it. There is also regulation relation to the control gears where they are separable. They're in essence the drivers, with a couple of exceptions that I'll come to. And then there are containing products. Now it's critical to understand what is a containing product. So a containing product is a luminaire. The luminaire contains a light source. However, the philosophy underlying this directive is that under the Single Lighting Regulation, for verification purposes, you must show how you can remove the light source from the luminaire if that is possible to do safely, and if it is possible to verify. And that basically means to power it up and get light from it and measure the light, measure the functionality. So for example, if I take the ROBUS Eagle and Hawk, for example, the gear tray is removable. The gear tray is the light source, not the fitting. So we'll in future be labeling the gear tray rather than the overall light fitting. So light sources, not luminaires, will be labeled unless you have something that's a sealed light source, for example, or you have an integrated driver. Let us say I took our Ultimum product, for example. That's a case where the containing product is deemed to be the light source, and that will be labeled. That will tend to happen more on downlight, smaller products, some high bay products as well, for example, where the containing product will be the light source. Circular economy requirements are also being introduced under Article 4 of the Single Lighting Regulation. And they're going to say that we must design so that we can remove and replace unless there's a good technical justification why we should not do so. So we're effectively being told that from now on, we must design for remediation. We must design for if the light source can be replaced and the fitting can be left in place, why throw out the plastic and the metal, which is perfectly good maybe for 20 years. As I say, the effective date is the 1st of September 2021. Okay, the structure of the regulation. So you've got the actual regulation, which is the articles. That's the top level legal document. And then you've got the annexes. Now the physics and the electrical engineering stuff is in the annexes, and they're effectively your working documents, especially Annex 2. So very briefly, the structure of this. There are 11 articles in the signal lighting regulation. Don't really worry about 5 to 11. Have a read through them. They're mainly legal as opposed to technical. Articles 1 to 4 are our main concern. So Article 1 essentially is about definitions. Article 3 is the key one. Article 3 is just a one-liner that says you must design according to Annex 2. Article 4 says that you must design for circular economy. And that immediately leads us then into the annexes. So there are some 22 definitions in the articles. There are further 62 definitions in Annex 1. And you must always refer back to these for guidance. This is a legal document at the end of the day. So it's very important to get your head around what are the definitions. I'll tell you what some of the important ones are, but there are a lot of other ones in there which are things essentially the lighting industry knows, but maybe the legal people don't necessarily understand, and they need a definition for it. So Annex 2 is where we're going to spend most of the time. The other annexes, 3 is a big list of exemptions, and it's mostly specialist lighting. Scientific lights, lights using spectrometers, theatre lights, all that kind of stuff, all excluded from this. And there are a lot of exemptions in there. There are 1 or 2 that I just want to highlight to you that are of relevance to the general lighting market. Annex 4 is the verification procedure. So when the Consumer Standards Officer goes into a typical wholesaler and picks up 1 or 2 of the products on display, takes them off for verification after buying them, that essentially are the tolerances which they will allow you. So there's a table in there that tells you whether you're going to do 2.5%, 5%, 10% tolerance on various things that they measure. And the big message that is in that is rely on those for your mass production. Don't rely on them for your design. Aim right for the center of the ballpark on that, and leave your allowances for genuine variances in mass production. There are also some prescriptions in Annex 5 on functionality after endurance testing. Annex 6 is just to tell you, okay, look, we've done this fairly. This is the state of the art on the market, which we've considered when we've drafted this regulation. Okay, we're going to Article 1. Article 1 is about subject matter and scope, and it says that these are legal requirements for placing on the market light sources or separate control gears. Now, the second sentence takes a lot of reading. It looks innocuous. The requirements also apply to light sources and separate control gears placed on the market in a containing product. Now, the order of that's critical. It does not say that the requirements apply to the containing product. They only apply to the containing product if that is deemed to be the light source, because you can't remove a light source from it and verify it. So the containing product is only verified by your trading standards officer in the field if it is, as last resort, the inseparable light source. If the trading standards officer can go in, read the instructions, which has to tell him how to remove the light source, he'll remove the light source and verify that. So it means that if you design your luminaire such that the light source is modular, and that's really where they want us to go, it can be removed from the luminaire with the attendant diffuser and its losses in the luminaire. And they're then allowing you to verify that higher flux per watt removed light source and not the containing product. Now, to my reading, that appears to penalise deliberately sealed luminaires, and it appears to reward modular light source holders. So there's a direction behind that called circular economy, which they explicitly write down in Article 4. And the rest of that article simply says there are exemptions. Go look up Annex 3 if you want to look for your exemptions. They won't be in general lighting by and large. Okay, Article 2. This is the main document, remember. These are the first 22 definitions, and The important ones that you need to know about are the first four. What is a light source? What is control gear? And what is a containing product? The other ones are simply definitions of things that we all know in the industry. What's an LED and so on and so on. For photometric parameters, what's CRI? We know all that stuff, okay? But it's there for completeness. Article 3 is the one that actually says you have to work according to Annex 2. And what's absolutely critical, as I say again, is if the light source can be removed for verification, not removed, removed for verification, and that basically means that it can be powered up and measured in that state, then that's the state in which it is to be verified as a light source. So you've got your typical surface mount fitting. If the gear tray is capable of being removed, wired up, and lit up, that's what they're going to verify. And that's what you're going to label. Now that may have implications on whether a light source is mains operated or not, or directional or not. You see the importance of that when I get into Annex 2. And it certainly has implications for diffuser losses, because the efficacy bar that is set, and they're quite challenging, is less challenging if the light fitting's out of its housing. This is the European Union's definition of a light source, and it's just there for completion. It's a hell of a long paragraph. In a nutshell, that's a lamp or a light engine gear tray, providing you can remove it and verify it separately from the light fitting. Failing that, the entire luminaire, now called the containing product, is the light fitting. And that's really all that's there. The provisions of that are so wide that that's pretty much anything that emits light that we use in general lighting. Again, there's a very long definition of what is control gear. Now, in a nutshell for you, that's the driver. The key thing you need to know is that power over Ethernet switches, those of you familiar with the very large, expensive and somewhat noisy power over Ethernet so-called switches, which is larger than this laptop I'm working from at the moment, they are not considered to be control gear. Whether they're trying to give us a steer on getting away from power over Ethernet or not, I don't know, but it is not considered to be a control gear within the means of this regulation. A separate control gear, definition 3, is one that's not physically integrated and that's placed on the market as a separate product or as part of a containing product. Now, in a lot of cases, that would be your driver. For example, we have a customized conversions department, and we put in a separate control gear into some drivers at the request of our valued customers who want them to do specific functions. So that comes under definition 3. Nothing major to worry about. As I say, the major thing there is that PoE switches are excluded. Containing products. Okay, so the luminaire itself, remember, can be a containing product if the light source can be extracted from it. That can also be a household appliance. So we sell, for example, mirrors. And if the mirror light can be extracted from that, that's the light source. If it cannot, the full mirror is considered to be the light source, and it is to be tested and labeled as a light source. True also of furniture lighting. Now, our furniture range lights are clearly extractable. We sell them separately, so they are a light source for the purpose of that. But if you had a piece of furniture such that its light source could not be removed, it becomes a light source. And the regulation applies to whatever is defined as the light source, not the containing product, unless that is the light source. Article 4. Article 4 is actually what legally says that we must work to circular economy. And it's a very short text for something that is having a huge implication across Europe. So it says 3 things in essence. What's written in yellow there? The light sources and the separate control gears can be replaced with the use of common, as I've received the text, commonly available tools and without permanent damage to the containing product. So you can take a screwdriver to extract the stuff, but they don't necessarily want you taking a crowbar or a sledgehammer. Manufacturers, importers, and authorized representatives of containing products are required to provide information about the replaceability or non-replaceability of light sources and control gears by end users. Now, there's a definition in there for end user. It is essentially Joe Public. It's somebody who is not skilled and doesn't normally do lighting. Or qualified persons, again without permanent damage to the containing product. And there are prescriptions around how that should look. The Lighting Europe document has much more detail on this. It is also necessary to ensure that light sources and separate control gears can be dismantled from containing products at end of life, and that's really your circular economy, where you now put in a new light source, a new control gear into the old fitting. It's like the hammer getting the 7 handles and 4 heads. That's the way they want us to go. So that's the directive. Okay, there's articles 5 to 11. Don't worry about them, they're legal. Let's get into the annexes. Annex 1 has another 62 definitions. And we only need to worry about a few of the key ones. And the reason we're worrying about these is these are critical to how you calculate your minimum efficacy allowance and some bonuses for it. So you cannot put something on the market that is below the minimum efficacy allowed for that lumen package and fitting the way it is. And that's not one number. You have to go calculate that number for your design. So you need to know whether it is a mains or a non-mains light source. That is to say, when you remove the lighting gear, does that operate on the mains or non-mains? Most things will apply as mains, because if you have a driver on the gear tray, which is necessary to light up the LEDs, that driver, which is a power converter, is considered to be a mains appliance. Is it directional or non-directional? Directional, by the way, is everything that is within a cone angle of 120 degrees. So that's most light fittings. Non-directional, light source. Non-directional is a different thing, wider than 120 degree, so 60 degree half angle, 120 degree full angle cone. Now, if you have a surface fitting and you have a diffuser, that may put more than 80% of the total luminance flux out of solid angle. But remember, that's not how you're measuring it. You're taking out the gear tray if it's removable, and you're measuring the gear tray, and you need to see, well, what's the solid angle? Essentially, have you got 80% of your total luminous flux within 120 degree solid angle, or cone angle rather? And if you have the directional light source, and you need to specify that, that goes into the calculation of the efficacy that you're allowed to have. Definitions 4, 5, and 6, they talk about connected light sources. This is your smart lighting. This is your connected lighting. And we like the definition they're using, connected rather than smart. And essentially there are two things. Now, in a connected light source, remember that your connecting parts, including the wireless chip, are considered to be part of the light fitting. Whereas in a connected separate control gear, the connecting parts are considered to be part of the driver. And again, that comes into the calculation of minimum efficacy allowances and bonuses. I need to talk to you briefly about tunable lights. Again, two long definitions. I don't like the spelling of tunable, but tunable white on its own, this is important for human-centric lighting, is not considered color tunable within the meaning of this definition. You must have at least one, under my reading of it anyway, of RG and B, and possibly you need two of them. You are allowed to have the ability to emit white. So RGB is included, obviously. RGBW is also allowed, RGBWW, and arguably RW, GW, or BW, or possibly what I call RWB, which is a future form of human-centric lighting, which is red in the afternoon, blue in the morning, and it's got white all day long. So the range defined in Article 2 that they talk about, that's essentially, if you look up the CIE chromaticity diagram, any of you familiar with it, and you've got the black body locus along it, and you've got that kind of typical region and your zones along that you'll be familiar with from photometric reports. It's that region, and anything outside that's considered to be a coloured light. So if you're only tuning within your typical white area, that's not a colour tunable light. And again, that's important for efficacy calculations because you get a bonus for colour tunable light sources, which is 10% of your efficacy. Be aware that there are certain sources deemed to be HLLS. They are high luminance light sources, and the reason you need to be aware of it is that there is a bonus for HLLS, which is combinable with some of the other bonuses, not all of them. Read the regulations carefully. And the reason they give you this is that thermal management and efficiency is much more challenging if you have a very concentrated light source. You have lots of LEDs in the one place. (12) and 13 in the definitions in Annex 1 are important. And the critical bit there is a lighting control part is something that isn't strictly necessary for the light source to emit light full load, okay? But which may be used. A dimmer is a lighting control part. So is a data connection part. There are non-lighting parts. The repeaters for communication signals to extend the range are not lighting parts. So obviously their energy consumption does not count in efficacy. Parts for supporting grid balance remains to be interpreted whether that includes power factor correction, parts of a driver. I have my doubts that is true. Systems for switching to internal batteries. That's obviously relevant to emergency. Battery charging parts of the driver, they don't contribute to your efficacy calculation. Again, there are definitions here. You'll see me talking about on power mode. That's essentially the full load power. No load power is defined, standby power is defined, and there are pretty strict limits on that, by the way, half a watt. And network standby power, which is also at half a watt, and you cannot combine your standby power and your network standby power. The combination of them has to be under half a watt. So that's very important for your energy efficacy calculations. Okay, this is the nub of it. Here's the formula. This is it. From September 12 months, the declared power consumption of a light source P on, and that's the full on power, shall not exceed the maximum allowed on power in watts, defined in terms of the declared luminous flux that is useful and the declared color rendering index. So this is the new regime. You declare the luminous flux, and that ties your hand on what you actually put in your catalogues and your labeling. So you might take a light fitting and say that is a 1400 lumen light fitting. That's your starting point. You must also declare the color rendering index. You'll be declaring CCT also, by the way, to within 100 Kelvin. The color rendering index, key piece of advice, don't declare a CRI 80 or 90 or 70. If you know it's 82, declare it as 82. If it's a 4000 Kelvin surface mount fitting and you know it's CRI 84, declare it as 84. It helps you in this calculation. It helps you get over the bar. Because what they've built in here is they're starting, you see a Greek letter, you see two Greek letters in there. So phi useful is your declared luminous flux. So let's start there, and let's say that's 1400 lumen. You then have that other Greek letter in there, eta, which is your efficiency, or the efficacy, I'm sorry, threshold efficacy. That is essentially what we know is the efficacy in lumens per watt fitting. Now, depending, they're effectively forcing you, as you will see in a moment, to start from a basis of that must be 120 lumens per watt. And they then give you this F factor, which is an efficacy factor. And they allow you to derate if it's a directional light source, which most are. And they then also build in an end loss factor, which for LED fittings is 1.5. And for some fittings will be up as high as 2. For connected light fittings, you're allowed an end loss factor of 2 watts. You are then further allowed an allowance for your CRI factor, that's the R at the end. That effectively is a derating factor for the lower CRIs. And it's an increase factor for the higher CRIs. So they've got their head around the fact that CRI tends to go with efficacy. And that's been built into the formula. What you need to do in a nutshell is realize that there's no single number anymore that you must exceed. And you need to write your own spreadsheet calculator to determine the number for each of your products, point by point by point, building in all of their various factors. Strong bit of advice to quote CRI to the nearest unit. There's a table 1. The only line you need to worry about that if you're in the LED business is the last line. And that essentially is the start. That's the threshold efficacy. So we're starting on the basis of, okay, we'd love if everything was 120 lumens per watt and a loss factor of 1.5. If it's connected light source, see the little star there, you're allowed to have 2.0 watts as your essentially your end loss allowance. There's then a table 2. Table 2 says we're assuming everything's non-directional and doesn't operate on mains. If it does operate on mains, they give you another 8% on the efficacy, because obviously they know there's a power converter involved. Now, if you think about it, that's an allowance for a 92.6% efficacy driver. And that's pretty much the top end of the state of the art in drivers. You're really pushing a driver at that stage as a power converter to get that's absolutely exquisite at the moment. Now, what happens is if you have a directional light source, and remember that's anything within 120 degrees full cone angle, you get another 15%. So 80% of your light coming out within 120 degree angle, you get another 15% allowance. That's going to affect most of us. When you come to labeling, and it takes a very careful reading of the regulation, that 8% allowance for mains driving is clawed back from you. Read it very, very carefully. It appears to be clawed back. There are prescriptions for here for fluorescent, HID, metal halide, plenty of lights that we don't normally encounter if we're primarily an LED supplier. Color tunable light sources, so your RGBs, they get a bonus of plus 0.1. High luminance light sources get a proportional bonus, but your directional bonus is clawed back. 15% directional bonus is clawed back. That's why you need a spreadsheet. You need to actually go away and dismantle all of this, unpack it, and work out your own spreadsheet. Certain bonuses are cumulative. The high luminance bonus is not combined with the basic C value. They claw back the 15%. And the reason why is that the 15% is actually built into the HLLS bonus when you put through the formula. Go down to the end there, the standby power and the network standby power shall not exceed a half a watt, and you can't add the two allowances together and say, oh, it's networked and it's a light source. I'm going to add the two of them together. Total is only half a watt. Now that means your wireless chips need to be very efficient in standby mode. That'll have interesting implications for some things, Bluetooth, I would suspect. There is a table 3 that you need to be aware of in Annex 2, and table 3 is about control gear and efficacy. You only need to worry about the last line. It's a formula there for the efficacy of control gear. Won't go into the calculations on that. I'd need another talk to do so. There are again requirements. These are the same requirements on control gear as are on the light sources about standby power, network power, and so on. The half-watt allowance. You can't add it together. And again, your wireless chips, they obviously need to be very efficient. But they are considered to be part of the control gear. Annex 2 Clause 2 refers to Table 4. And this is about functional requirements for light sources. So this is getting beyond your basic lumens per watt. And this is about all the other stuff like color rendering, displacement factor, your power factor, lumen maintenance, survival factor, color consistency, flicker, stroboscopic effect. Now, the numbers initially aren't starting off as terribly challenging, but they're going to become more challenging. And the point is, you have to be able to verify the requirements. So this applies whether the light source is a containing product rather, or not. And all of that table applies to mains operated light sources. The only exemptions, and they're the obvious ones, they are displacement factor, power factor, your flicker and your stroboscopic effects, non-mains lighting. So if you've got something, for example, like a floodlight that operates off a battery, of course you're not going to have flicker, strobing, or displacement factor. You're not in the mains. So that's the reason you have those exemptions there. It's only for non-mains lighting. And remember, it's a mains light if it's operating off a power converter. A typical driver, that's a mains light. Labeling on the light source itself. So the value, the luminous flux, the lumens and the color temperature have to go on there. And the beam angle if you've got room. And if you're short of room, the beam angle is the first one you leave off, then the CCT. And if there's only room for one value, you put the flux on. So they want the lumens on there. Now there's a whole prescription here. I've provided 1, 2, 3, or 2 pages of stuff that is supposed to be visibly displayed on the packaging, and another couple of pages that's supposed to be on the control gear. So just to draw your attention to the fact that on your website and on the control gear itself and on the packaging, there's a lot more that has to be put in there. The exemptions, there are pages of exemptions. The ones that I'm going to highlight that are important for us are your specialist lighting for example, petrol station, potentially explosive environments. You're exempt. Emergency lighting is exempt. That's very important. Marine lighting is exempt. Light sources in the UV. Now, reading this, I know that this needs to be extended to UVC LEDs, strictly speaking, for germicidal use, because E hasn't been written properly. But that's only in relation to something I was speaking about 2 weeks ago on these webinars. So anybody doing UVC LEDs for disinfecting against COVID, you are covered by D&E. They are exempt. Could be written a bit better, that's all. Light sources with a beam angle less than 10 degrees for spotlighting are exempt. Grow lights are exempt. Some color tunable light sources with a certain excitation and purity, very colored lights, essentially blues, greens, reds, for high quality colored light, which could be important in some display applications at butchers, for example, they're exempt. And there's another few regulations about Annex 3 as well. Again, don't worry about that too much. There's a whole series, point 4, of exemptions as well, stuff for use in film studios, TV studios, and so on. So all the specialist stuff is left out of this still because it has to be. Cast your eye over table 6. That's the verification tolerances. Now, that tells you for various full-on power mode how much in the market, if they take 10 samples, what's the variance on any of those samples allowed to be from what you've declared. Okay? And it's declared values that they're primarily measuring you against. So your declared value that you've got in your website, you've got in your technical files, that's absolutely critical to get that right. And that needs to be right in the center of your mass production window. And again, they've got notes of how verification is to be done. Important, there are differences in how it's done for strip lighting. And they're going to try and do 50 centimeters or as near as they can of a strip light. And the manufacturer is required to indicate so that any inspection officer can simply find out what control gear they should use for that length, or what driver they should use. So this is all set up for enhanced market surveillance, and there will be enhanced market surveillance. On that subject, there's a new energy label for light sources, and as you can see, it's the more classic A to G, the ENERG label, okay? And you can have a large version or a small version, but it's going to call us out, and that's shown as a B label. We won't be seeing any B labels very soon. Now, you need to look at the ELR for this one, the energy labeling regulation. That's the second one. Remember, I've been talking mostly about the single lighting regulation, the SLR, this morning. So the energy efficiency class is defined by the useful luminous flux, which is what you declare under the single lighting regulation, divided by the declared on-mode power consumption and multiplied by an applicable factor, which in a lot of cases will be 1. Now, here we go. You're sitting down carefully for this. This is challenging. You won't see any A's or B's appearing in the market anytime soon. C's will be rarer items, really up at the high bay end. D's as well. G's will be largely illegal, but not entirely. When this was originally being drafted, we understood that G was simply going to be illegal. That's not the case. There are some F's that will be illegal because they won't meet the required P on max power or the equivalent efficacy for that design of light fitting. So the factors, and all that's going on here is, remember that 8% that I said that they give you on the on the legally allowed efficacy for operating on mains. But when it comes to labeling, they claw that back, and this is the clawback formula. So that's why you have these factors here. It's essentially to take back that 8% from you. So you can pass legally, but how they're going to put the clampers on you is they will take the 8% off and they'll probably push you down a class as a result on calculating your efficacy. So in summary, read the original documents. Always rely on those. They are legal documents. In transcription, if you're getting something third or fourth hand, and I have lifted verbatim anything I've shown you here is a regulation. If you are reading anything third or fourth hand, you can have transcription errors. Okay. The Lighting Europe documents are particularly good as an expanded guide on this. There are many valuable comments in there. The actions are, everybody's going to be setting up calculators for their eco-design efficacy requirements under the single lighting regulation, and we'll be auditing existing products against them. We are doing that at the moment. Many already pass. We have had eco-design compliant products on the market, certainly back to 2015. Many of them. And obviously everybody's going to have a program to bring all the light fittings, remaining ones, into compliance in good time. Everybody's going to be revising their packaging to comply with the new labeling requirements. Now, you can't put the label out before September the 1st, 2021, and there is an allowance out to around April 2023, I think it is, April, possibly August 2023, to get the other stuff off the market. And the reason for that is they're not actually allowing the new label to go out until the 1st September 2021. Information manuals, instruction manuals, online resources. There's certain stuff that is supposed to be available on your website with a QR code. And that again is just to help the electrician in the field, and just pop a QR code, go on the ROBUS site and download what they need. And likewise, of course, the market surveillance inspectors can do the same. And the big drive, obviously, is they've now gamified the whole thing, increase the efficacy, get a better energy rating. And redesign anything. Sorry, one other point, they're redesign fittings that don't comply with the circular economy requirements, which are in Article 4. So that's a quick, I suppose, a cook's tour of the single lighting regulation, primarily, with a little bit about the energy labelling regulation that accompanies it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them to the extent that I can. One of the things that I will say is that we all have homework to do. Well, anybody who wants to understand this needs to build their own calculator and get their head around exactly how this formula operates and how it operates in response to any one of the parameters that feed into it. Okay, questions starting to come in here now. With me now a moment. Okay, quite a few questions in here. Okay, one is a request for the presentation. Okay, so question, somebody doing calculations using the formula for max allowable power and transposed formula for minimum required efficacy. The regulation is actually strict, the answer to that question. You can get quite low powers. Where you will get low values for the allowed efficacy is on your lower power products, the lower lumen packages. So if I take, for example, a 500 lumen emitting downlight, for example, the efficacy of that is allowed to be a good deal lower than something maybe like a 1400 lumen emitting surface mount light. So where the regulation gets strict is when you get out beyond about 800, 900 lumens, it ramps up. And it ramps up quite sharply between about 500 and 1000 lumens. So probably not doing anything wrong. Our marketing department will be sending out a presentation. The intention is to send out various presentations within probably a few days. So, okay, interior designer asking, is this for commercial or for domestic? This is for everything, Claudia, absolutely everything. This is for every single item. It's not purely for commercial. Everything that is sold must question about light output ratio. It appears to be silent on that. It's talking about efficacy. It's very much geared towards efficacy. And the efficacy of the gear if you can get the gear out of the light fitting. This isn't a registered CPD course. This is an informational webinar which we're providing a question about whether it qualifies for CPD points. Not at the moment. Right? Interesting question. Is this going to have much of an effect on the price of the end product? Now, I am not on the commercial side of the house, but I can tell you that there is going to be a drive towards more higher end product in the market. And to get up to the stratosphere of the scale of A, B, and C will require higher spec LEDs that you can bet will be sold by their manufacturers for a good deal more to people like us who are light fitting manufacturers than we would typically pay for mid-range LEDs. Okay, I think that's me at the end of the series of questions. So if there are no more questions, I would like to thank you for your attendance today and leave you with a message. You can trust Robus to be on top of the latest developments in the lighting industry and to be your most trusted lighting supplier, LED lighting. Thank you for your attendance, and do watch future notifications from our marketing department for any future webinar programs which we run. We hope this series of webinars, which we're now concluding, the series of 5 over the last few weeks, have been helpful to you in lockdown, and hopefully we'll all be getting out of lockdown in some form or other very soon. Thank you very much, and good morning. Sorry, one other question. Points, again, just to remind you, you need to register on www.robusgo.com and follow the instructions to get your points. Thank you very much, and good morning.